Welcome. Hi. Welcome to Generational Disconnection, the future of civic life. I am Devanshi Patel, Chair of Advance Arlington, and it is wonderful to see you here this evening as we continue our learning journey together. A heartfelt thank you to our board, our sponsors, members, and program partners. Your generosity of time, resources, and expertise makes these community conversations possible. So you've heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. For over 70 years, Advance Arlington has been a trusted space for tackling the big issues facing our community. Our guiding principles remain the same: conversation, not confrontation; education, not advocacy; partnership, not partisanship. As Arlington evolves, so do the questions before us. Our North Star remains the same: providing a neutral and trusted space where neighbors can learn, engage, and shape the future together. Last month, we explored a completely irrelevant topic: redistricting. So slow. So slow on that one. The special election reminded us of the importance of civic engagement, the franchise, our institutions, and the rule of law. As we embark on the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there may be no conversation more important than the promise and future of democracy and civic life. We are living in a moment when adults across age groups express dissatisfaction with politics, polarization, and public institutions. So it should come as no surprise that young people, while supportive of democracy in principle, are increasingly disconnected from how they experience it in practice. Democracy depends on every generation feeling connected to it, making tonight's conversation on youth civic engagement particularly urgent. And it is my pleasure to introduce our panel of experts who will help illuminate these issues. Diana is a graduating senior who is committed to Virginia Tech University. She is interested in, yes, please, clap for her. She is interested in political science with an eye towards law school. Chetan is a rising senior with a passion for social justice and change making. Here we go. Also interested in Doug Law. You want to clap for that? Susan Cunningham is our wonderful member of the Arlington County Board. Trelon Shorter, we are so excited to welcome you here this evening. Trelon is a political strategist and the executive director of the Youth Democracy Institute. And of course, our dear friend Brian Stockton, chief of staff for our favorite school system, Arlington Public Schools. Thank you guys very much for being here. So our moderator this evening will not be me. Yay, me. It is going to be Babiha, this lovely young woman standing next to me. She also is a graduating senior with an impressive track record for civic leadership. She will be in the incoming class for Stanford University this fall. Tonight's discussion is future-oriented and grounded in lived experience. We are grateful to all three of these remarkable students for sharing their time and perspectives. And frankly, they are modeling civic engagement and offering us a window into what we can expect as they continue their journeys moving forward. So let's give them another round of applause. So friends, as always, your questions and reflections are welcome here in our community classroom. This is our shared learning space, and now it is my privilege to turn the program over to Babiha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Patel, for introducing our panelists and for introducing me. So as Ms. Patel mentioned, my name is Babiha, and I'll be moderating this session. So let's just, I guess, get right into it. How are we feeling? Ready to go? Okay, perfect. So just to give us some background and frame the context of this discussion a little bit, I want to share some research facts as well. So right now, young adults ages 18 through 34 across the political spectrum are overwhelmingly dissatisfied with how democracy and its civic institutions are addressing the issues that they currently face. So here are some facts. More than a third of them have no intention of participating civically, with the same percentage reporting that voting in 2024 wasn't important to them. Only 36% agree that democracy can effectively address the nation's most pressing challenges, and even fewer, close to 16%, believe that democracy is working well for young people. 61% do not identify with either major political party, and 52% have no or very little trust in government institutions. So to the panelists, when you all hear these numbers, what feels most alarming to you personally? I think we can, start with Jathan and just kind of go down the line.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to Advance Arlington for hosting this and having me. Thank you to Ms. Patel, and thank you, Babiha. So looking at these numbers, the thing that is the most alarming to me is that I'm not surprised by any of them. From my conversations with my peers at school, both in and outside of school, these numbers seem very real. A lot of the people I talk to who are my age are not interested in voting, and they're not interested in taking part of any of these civic structures and institutions, and they're not interested in engaging at all. I also believe that there's a lack of trust in democracy and also the government as a whole. So for me, all of this is alarming.
I think the fact that as a society we tend to emphasize that the future of our nation is in the hands of our younger generations, it's really disheartening to see that young adults do not see a place for them in the long-term future of our nation. And I see it within my social peers that they feel very disconnected from the conversations of politics just because they don't believe that they can make an impact. So.
I too, I want to say thank you for having me at the Advance Arlington tonight, you all. I feel like I have a right. Hello. And so thank you all for having me this evening. The thing about distrust, I think what bothers me more than the distrust is the disconnection that I hear of our young people. When young people feel that their voices are not heard, they stop participating. And when they stop participating, institutions don't respond to them as well. It only works when they trust, they're connected, and they feel like their voices are being heard. So I know I hear the numbers on the distrust, but the disconnection bothers me even more.
It's interesting to, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I'm also grateful that I am going behind those who work with young people and young people themselves. When I looked at the statistics and preparing for today's conversation, I think what struck me as interesting was that the disconnect is around the lack of trust that young people have. Now, what is also interesting is that the numbers that were shared were national. And so when you look at it from a local perspective, our young people in Virginia showed us something a little different. They showed us that they are engaged, while nationally young people's voting participation waned a little bit, I think a couple points behind in what it was in 2020, where we saw 50% of young people showing up and voting. But in 2024, we saw those numbers go to 47%. And Virginia youth voter turnout hovered at around 55%. So it depends on who you ask and where you're asking the young people why they are not showing up. And I think for our young people in Virginia, I think their proximity to being close to the nation's capital, and the fact that issues such as gun violence in particular are some of the reasons why young people in this area are showing up and staying engaged. So overall, the numbers do show that there is considerable a lack of trust, but that has not necessarily shown up so much in Arlington, and we certainly could have higher numbers in the Commonwealth. But 55%, when we look at the national numbers, gives us a brighter picture.
Love, love that optimism. I mean, I think for me, it's also the disconnection, and not just from the political process, but from other people and sort of other viewpoints, which is really a time that we're living in of where social media and sort of curated information have gone to an extreme, and we will bounce back from it, but it's an extreme. And so we don't have the same richness of being with people you disagree with and trying to figure out how to say that, or being even with different generations routinely. So, I think it's definitely a wake-up call. As a parent of young folks, I feel like maybe my generation's kind of screwed the pooch a little bit, that maybe we waited too long to let the generation ahead of us continue leading, and now how do we demonstrate and show how to step forward. So yeah, I think it's really calling our attention. I'm so glad we're having the conversation today. And I guess I would say, coming out of the county's budget season where we talked about gymnastics and libraries an awful lot, I got to see a lot of our young people engaging very, very productively. And I think, that might be a way forward as well, to think about the local government, the local school institution, kind of building from there so you get the reps, and then you can build out from there to things that are harder to change.
Thank you all for those responses. I actually the next question is going to lead into what Mr. Stockton was describing about youth voices being heard, and also kind of grounding us more locally. So for Chethan and Diana, what are some conversations that young people your age are maybe having in private, or things that young people are talking about that aren't being heard by adults, or that or topics that adults may not fully understand?
Personally, I think that a lot of my peers are having these conversations about navigating economic precarity, particularly with grocery and housing. And they feel like they're inheriting these systems that weren't built for them in mind, like they didn't consider what the future would look like. And I also believe that there are significantly less opportunities for young people to be involved, which is why there's a massive disconnect in society from our youth and civic engagement. I wanted to give a specific example of Maxwell Frost, the first member of Gen Z in Congress, who had his midterm elections at the age of 25 and then entered into office at 28. And we're not seeing these opportunities repetitively for young adults in politics, which is why we're having these conversations that aren't directly focused and targeted to our future generations, and having them in private, because we don't feel like there's a space where we are accepted to be involved in and have an actual impact and actually being listened to.
Yeah, well, I agree with what Diana was saying, and also going back to what Mr. Stockton was saying about the disconnect between the older generation and our generation. I think that from the conversations I've had with my peers, a lot of young people don't understand what their representatives are doing for them, and I think that there's sort of both, especially at the national level, but I think that most importantly there needs to be a high connection at the local level, like Ms. Cunningham was saying. So I think that for me, I would feel like focusing on sort of allowing younger people at the local level to be engaged more first, before moving on to national issues, which I know young people care a lot about, but I think it should definitely start locally.
So kind of following up on that, this is a question for Ms. Cunningham. You mentioned that you are concerned about declining trust among young people, but what concerns you the most about seeing that trust decline?
It's interesting. Every generation is disconnected from the one above and below it, and then more connected to the one on the other side of that. It's just sort of the grandparent aura. And I just came back from spending a weekend with my parents and my kids and seeing that again. So, it's not new. And I think if you look at history, you see, and you look at different countries, you look at this country, you see a pattern across history of, it's almost like a sine curve. Things ebb and they flow. And And in the middle of it, it feels kind of terrifying, but it usually works out. And so I think for me, in this particular moment, and maybe being the parent of a teenager makes it more poignant, but you know, at least my kids who are 16 and 18, they don't remember a time when the current president wasn't top of the news or when iPhone wasn't in the pocket. And, you know, there were other big transformations in my childhood, but like those are really, really big. And so the ability to see the possibilities, you know, or to see what a functioning federal government looks like has been limited. Someone told me they were watching West Wing with their kids to just, you know, illustrate that there used to be some deliberation and that sort of thing. So, you know, and it's not about partisanship, but it is, you know, we are, I was with John Meacham, who is just an amazing writer, a presidential scholar, and completely nonpartisan this weekend. And he said, you know, we will know in 2028 if this was the era of Trump or whether we're in the era of Trumpism. And I think that's a really going to be a defining moment for your generation and for all of us. And again, it's about the conversation, not conflict, the participation, not partisanship. We've gotten pretty bad at that for this moment. So that is the rebuilding that all of us really need to be working on. That we're still working on a more perfect union, and it ain't perfect, but each time we try, we're going to fail, and then we'll come back and we'll try again, and we'll get it a little better. But we all have to be willing across our lives to show up and try and to fail and to let others fail and then to come back again.
Great, thank you very much for your insights. Ms. Shorter, this is actually a question about how you see youth dissatisfaction playing out at the state and local levels. I know you mentioned some pretty optimistic statistics, but are we seeing youth dissatisfaction here in Virginia as well?
Right. Like I said earlier, I think the young people in Virginia are in a different place in their understanding of democracy, just like I said before, because of proximity. And so you look overall, you know, the difference between 2020 and 2024 presidential came down to like less than 3 million votes, or roughly 3 million votes was the differential. And then specifically in terms of around less than 3 million people sat out of the election. When you look at young people, about 55%, like I said, showed up in Virginia, which was great. But nationally, those numbers showed a slight difference in terms of, I think it was a 3% difference. And so Virginia, I think the reason I started Youth Democracy Institute, like Susan, I'm also a mom, and I felt that investment in civic engagement programs was not a priority for our school systems because of the other priorities that the educators are tasked with, reading, math, standards of learning. And in our state, we have civics requirement, particularly starting at grade 4, then again at grade 7, and then again at grade 11. And so we started Youth Democracy Institute with that in mind, of making sure that we had accessible programming available in schools. So it was important to us to come into schools, and we're building that. We're a year old, and we're building those relationships in schools so that young people can have the training early. What we're seeing on TV, and we'll get to this at some point, but I think the big concern here is making sure that the schools are partnering with organizations like ours to provide accessible civic engagement classes so that when young people enter into the voting age of 18 in our region, that they are equipped early with the tools of how to engage and make change. And our premise is that it cannot just be left to voting. And so we're seeing young people in this region, Oregon, I think 1 in 5 nationally, young people are engaged in some form of civic activity, writing petitions, organizing activities. There's walkouts, as you know, in Arlington. And so we are seeing, and I want the young people in Virginia to lead the way nationally. And so that's, I'm bringing some optimism, and you'll hear that throughout.
Great, thank you so much. You touched upon the point of civic engagement in schools, and I actually wanted to ask Mr. Stockton, since schools are one of the first institutions that young people experience directly, how well are students being prepared to understand local government, and where do you see any gaps in how civic education connects federal, local, and state systems in practice?
Perfect. Thanks for the question. I think, Arlington Public Schools, or just schools in general, are doing a better job helping kids understand concepts, political concepts, and national issues. However, I think where we fall short is helping them understand how actual government, local government works. And that's why this organization is a good organization. So I can go to any kid at any school and they'll tell me who the president of the United States is. Far fewer know who's on the school board. Far fewer know who's on the county board. Far few know who's on the planning commission. And I think with that, we got to do a better job. We have to do a better job in helping them understand that. So I think we do a good job in schools as far as memorization. However, I think we need to do a better job with experience. They need to be experienced and understand the experience of how things affect them. And that's the gap. I think the gap is memorization, learning what they do, but also actually feeling it. One thing I would want to say as well is that I would say if we look back, when I first came to Arlington in 2020, and it was right after George Floyd, the young people across the country, basically I was on television, I was at home proud to see all these young people across the country participating because something had affected them. And so we have to teach them more about how things affect them and how they can be engaged and get involved. So again, moving from memorization to experience, having them participate in coming to Advance Arlington. We need more young people here to fill out the room. We need them coming to the school board meetings. We need them going to the county board meetings to understand those things. And that's how we do it. I think, like I said, we do it with the books. But as my father always says, you're only as intelligent as your exposure. So we can use the books. However, we have to provide pathways and opportunities for them to get the exposure, and then they know that their voice counts and they can participate.
Thank you very much. Very, very important points there. I guess continuing on this topic of civic engagement, this is a question for everyone as well. What do adults tend to misunderstand about why young people participate or even choose not to participate in civic life? I guess we can start down the line as well.
Yeah, so I think the biggest misconception about why young people participate or don't participate is that they don't participate because they don't want to. I think that's false. I think a lot of young people are really interested and care a lot about the things that are affecting them. I think that the biggest issue is that they don't know how to participate. I think that actually Arlington does a really great job of sort of letting young people learn how to engage, but across the country and even across the state, there should definitely be opportunities in organizations like CIFA where people are able to make actual change and be the decision makers at the same level as the adults, making decisions for themselves and for their families so that they know that their voice counts, because a lot of young people don't know how to make their voice count, and I think that's just a really big problem today.
I completely agree with Chathan. I think that's been my experience personally. I definitely didn't get involved in any civil issues until maybe my junior year of high school, and definitely not super involved until my senior year, solely due because of CIFA's impact. But I know people in the communities where I grew up have no idea where to even get started. There's no conversation that's being held with them. And I'm not saying that for Arlington specifically. I think Arlington does do an amazing job. But I know that there are low-income communities that are more focused on these personal issues that impact them directly to their household. And there is no time or no opportunities for them to have these conversations, especially with their children, about getting involved in issues at a local level or even a national level. So yeah.
At the same time, I would have to say I think the ones that participate is because they have parents or family members and friends or people that they're exposed to as teachers who are like, talking about it with them. And so they participate, and when they talk about it with their children, they talk about it with passion. And so the children want to get involved and participate. And also sometimes, like if the parent is actually participating on like working on a campaign or something, that would be a way for a child for a young person to actually know how to be involved. I think you made a good point when you said they don't do it just because they don't know. I think a lot of you said that about a lot of things. So I definitely think this is true, but they don't participate. And I'm kind of like bite off your answer as well. But they don't participate because they have other issues. They may not have that family unit at home. They may be dealing with social economic issues that are affecting them. Or again, they feel that the decisions, when they look at the news as a young person, some of the decisions that go against them or go against their families or race, religion, or anything they have, they think that's why bother? Why bother even get involved at that point? So I think it's what we have to do is have to have more people to, you have to have more Susan Cunninghams and Brian Stottons and so forth and Matt DeFerrantes that we're actually talking to these kids on a regular basis that we can get them to participate. So I think, again, I like your answer. They don't participate because they don't know or they don't know how. They just hadn't again, like I said before, been exposed.
And I would just add to that, I think, one of the reasons, again, why Youth Democracy Institute exists is because the need to have experiential learning opportunities for young people, bringing them into spaces and places where elected officials are, that they're getting the training on how to emulate that in the positive aspects of what our democracy is the aspirational aspects of our democracy. And so experiential learning is one. The other concern is that adults are not meeting young people where they are. And so, and we know that about 70%, young people are getting about 70% of their news through social media, right? And so the traditional forms of ad campaigns on TV, those kinds of spaces where you're trying to educate on issues. Many of us, and I am a generation behind baby boomers, and so like from baby boomers on down, or from my generation on up, we really do need to work at making sure that we are reaching young people where they are in the ways in which they're receiving their news and their sources of information. Now, because social media is the space where the forum where news and such exist, they are more prone to misinformation. And so this is where the school systems, I think, can come in as a great partner, especially since young people are learning primary source information. And so we just have to marry the two with experiential learning opportunities and provide that to young people regularly and within the school system. Sorry.
Yeah, I think y'all nailed it pretty well, that at all ages, to see it being done, to have a place to talk about it, to pick it apart and complain is all of that's very useful. I remember the Kennedys, they used to have, you'd sit down for dinner and there'd be like a 500-word essay that you had to read, or an excerpt from Time or whatever. Before you ate, you had to have this family dialogue. And I think all of us are so busy or so distracted or so running in all different directions that kind of thing doesn't happen as much, right? Or you don't get stuck on a boring road trip with your grandmother and have to like make conversation, like, because there's so much distraction. And there's a piece of that's how we teach and how we learn. And so, I love what the Democracy Institute is doing, of like creating places for that to happen, noticing that it's happening. And then we all can amplify that to say, oh, look, our young people are doing great things. So one shameless plug, because if I leave without saying it, we have our youth well-being plan underway. And we do have a number of youth ambassadors to try to keep us engaged and reaching out to the community. But if there are any young people or any not young people involved in your lives, I think that's a unique opportunity for Arlington to claim our space, to state our vision, and to do it together across generations with the children and youth at the helm.
Thank you so much. So I know some of you mentioned like the idea of experiential learning and I guess expanding ways young people can participate, but I actually wanted to ask Ms. Shorter if there are any forms of civic participation that institutes are still not recognizing as legitimate or are kind of slow in recognizing as legitimate.
Yeah, like I said before, I think I think there's a couple things. When you look closely at Arlington and the demographics of our county, the fact that we have a large immigrant community, a variety of our own melting pot here in Arlington County. And so the way that we need to meet young people is not only in the spaces where they are, and whether it's through social media or in the schools, but we also have to be speaking the same language, right? And I think this idea, like picking up on ambassadors, we do need to have ambassadors, and we can I envision cultivating that as a multi-generational experience. So young people paired up with older generations, and then the cross pollination in communication. So I think that is important, and so organizing done in that way such that it is intergenerational and multicultural. The organizing, I think, on social media is where we are not recognizing the power. And so TikToks is, so the furthest of social media that I have gone, so there was Facebook, hands up for those of you on Facebook. Okay, keep your hand up if you're on Twitter, now known as X. Okay, now who has Instagram? Okay, I do have Instagram, but I've only done one post. And so for TikTok, I'm like, I do not know how to do that. And I was reluctant to get on TikTok because, we were hearing that the feds were like, there's a problem with TikTok and national security. But all the politicians running for president got on TikTok. So when they did, I said, I might as well figure this out. And so we have got to use and be more engaged, and young people are organized, and they are calling people out and holding people accountable vis-a-vis TikToks and like, who is on Blue Sky? And so, like, for some that's like a foreign language, but that's a whole nother platform, True Social. And so anyway, so we just have to be covering our bases, and I think the social media component, we cannot underestimate the power of organizing within those spaces, and that is, and that's a focus for us at Youth Democracy Institute.
So Ms. Shorter just mentioned social media, so I actually wanted to ask Diana, like in addition to social media, where are young people already leading in ways that like adults like may not fully recognize yet as well?
Well, I think that young people are definitely very involved in advocacy. It might not be directly with the government institutions, but I wanted to mention touch on something that Ms. Shorter mentioned earlier about walkouts. I got to see in real time the process of the students at Arlington Tech High School organized a protest against ICE raids and these mass deportation issues. and I got to see their processes and their true passion about this change. And starting from maybe it was like 3 students, and they created a mass network between themselves to get initially about like over 1,000 students to participate in these protests across all high schools in Arlington Public County. And they used digital media to have a massive outreach to their peers and the adults in the area also. But I think when the protests occurred, I think we saw that there wasn't much of a impact just because they organized it through the schools, and it felt kind of limited, but I think they did it through the school instead of doing it from an alternative path and just doing it like on a Saturday, on a weekend, because they feel pressured from, there's a lot of students that have parents that are also limiting them because they're afraid of what protesting may result in. What are the consequences of having social unrest, right? And I think I wanted to compare that to the No Kings protests that have been occurring in Arlington. It's a massive organization that has multiple networks, and it has a blueprint and a significantly higher outreach, and just processes that are organized. You know, they have an actual structure compared to these students who had an initiative, had a passion, had a change that they wanted to implement, and they went for it, which is something that I don't think we really talk about now. We don't really recognize that students want to advocate and they want to be involved. And although it might not be as organized as like the No Kings protest, it's a start, and it's a conversation that needs to be had. So, yeah.
Thanks for talking about that, Diana. So another question for Chethan. What are you seeing as like the issues or causes that are motivating students to speak up or take action? I know Diana mentioned a few, but I want to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah. So the first one I would say is what Diana just touched on, which is immigration. I think every day in school, there's a lot of conversations about this topic. I think it's touched a lot of people in Arlington, whether it's been their family, someone they know, and obviously it's affected so many people across the country. But I also think a huge issue that a lot of people don't mention that much is that young people care a lot about the climate. They care a lot about the environment, and they're really worried that the environment we are going to inherit has been mishandled by the older generations, and that politicians today aren't dealing with climate change as much as they believe it to be an issue. So I think that the environment has been something that a lot of people my age care about, and the things that we see on social media about it has definitely affected that. But the third one I would say is democracy. I think that everything that's happened, throughout our lives, I'm only 17 years old, but the way that democracy has been shifted, it's been eroded, it's been brought back. There's been so many things that have happened that has created a fluctuation in young people's trust in their institutions. And people are really confused. What will be left when the dust settles? Will our institutions be safe? Will there be checks and balances? These are questions that we ask ourselves every single day, that I ask myself, and that we see on every form of social media every single day. So I would say that those 3 issues are definitely what I hear in the hallways and what I personally believe to be very important for young people.
Great, thank you so much. So given that both Diana and Chethan just mentioned all of these issues, I wanted to ask Mr. Stockton how APS is creating opportunities for students to be supported and practice leadership, dialogue, and civic participation as well.
Okay. I'll say one thing we're working on is creating intentional opportunities for kids to where their voices have not been symbolic. We got to do a better job with that. And so not only we need to make it symbolic, but at the same time, when they speak out, apply it to our decision making, the things that we do in our school system, it affects the culture of the school. Now, we do a lot of things. The walkout that we've been talking about all evening, we actually, we allow the kids they organize it themselves. We create the pathway, provide the security guards and so forth, and we provide the time out of school for them to actually to practice their civic engagement. But other than that, we have student advisory boards. We have student representatives. We have restorative circles that people do up there as well. And at the same time, we just provide those opportunities and also partnership opportunities. when we did the strategic plan, Arlington for years had a strategic plan, you all. There was just words on paper, but we have a real strategic plan with real metrics and numbers that we have to achieve. And basically, there were several students that were actually on that committee to make that happen. So we are trying to incorporate student voice there. Also, at the same time, our students, they act on their own, you know, like I mentioned the walkouts, they organize the walkouts themselves. They express it through art. They express it to when the superintendent and I go out to schools. I'm just saying, no, this is not like politics, but we went to Williamsburg Williamsburg Middle School recently, and we had a presentation by the fifth graders on how we need to repair and renovate their restrooms. And basically, I walked out there, saw a presentation, and I walked out, and basically the superintendent said, fix their restrooms. So, I saw that it's getting there, they're doing like a dip toe and getting involved. And so we got to create environments like that in schools for them, even if it's just the restroom. We'd have to do that for them. But I would say, you know, working with them, we have to provide multiple pathways other than the ones I just mentioned. How can we incorporate the ones that the students are doing themselves and how they can make a difference? The thing is, you know, we want kids to graduate with a 4.2, have scholarships to 100 different colleges and so forth. But at the same time, one thing that we have to teach them, we can make them academically prepared, but we have to make them confident that their voices matter. And when we do that, I think they get involved. And so it's not, again, just not just the books. We have to provide the experience. At the same time, we have to give them the confidence and assurance and validation that their voice matters. And they need to leave our schools with that when they go on to colleges, to be activists in college and go on to be our future congressmen, county board members, and school board members, and so forth. So.
Thank you very much. I mean, Mr. Stockton just mentioned that student voices need to be heard in spaces where they currently aren't, and giving people that confidence. So I actually wanted to ask Ms. Cunningham if there are any ways that you see that the government still unintentionally pushes young people away and continues to stifle young people's voices.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. And I think if you put your history cap on and look back, even just in Virginia, whether it was intentional or unintentional is something to be studied, right? So I think there have, in every society, and ours is not exempt from it, power accumulates, and that accumulates over time and for other characteristics as well, and the institutions protect that power. That is a natural instinct of humans. And so, you know, I think it's always, we have to keep re-examining whether the institutions we inherited are up to the task of who we mean to be, and that's sort of back to that a little bit more perfect union, but not yet perfect. You have to keep iterating on that, and it's hard to do, you know. So I think at the local level, you know, we try to have moments of self-reflection. I think the schools have done their strategic plan. We're beginning what will probably feel too slow, but is an intentional process of understanding where we came from as a government and as a community, so that we can examine our own institutions and say, how are they working, and are they working for everyone, and how can we do better? And so I think we have to kind of hold democracy and civilization as this very evolving thing. It's not fully baked, and that's why youth engagement matters so much, because the youth need to help us get it right for them and for 2 generations past them, and you'll make mistakes too, but it's like that's the work we have to do. And so making spaces for that, I love, we have lots of scout groups come to do their badges, and then they send follow-up letters like, my big issue is my dad is getting really expensive speeding tickets, you know, and so we're like, well, here's things you could do to help your dad not get expensive speeding tickets, or all those sorts of things. So it's really engaging for me when youth are willing to share their viewpoint and call me out when I've got it wrong. It's really the work.
Thank you very much. So kind of looking a little bit towards the future, this is a question for all of you. What is one thing do you think Arlington would need to change for young people to actually feel like this community belongs to them too, so that their voices are actually being heard?
Any order?
Start with whoever, yeah.
Organizations like this organization right here, more of those, more partnerships with the schools, actually working with national organizations. Of course, there have been organizations, national organizations since I was in school to help kids with civic involvement. We just have to do a better job in creating those environments. I have to do a better job. I was asked earlier by Kathleen Mixon, someone that was asking me what I like about Arlington. I said, I think I like the congenial relationship between the school system and also the county board. And I think with that, we need to take advantage of that congenial, because it's not like that everywhere. It wasn't like that in Montgomery County. It wasn't like that in Memphis for me. But here it is different. We work together. And us coming together to create opportunities, not to always talk about the issues that are at hand, CIP and all these other things that we talk about, but also keep a topic on the table every time we meet to talk about what can we do to expose these kids to understanding what's going on. Because I do think when we do that, they can understand basically how the school budget affects them. They can understand how the county budget affects them, how the county budget affects transportation and so forth. So I just think, us as adults always keep in mind not just the topics that are in front of us, but one topic that should be evergreen on the list. It should be kids and how can we expose them to the political and civic environment.
Absolutely, thank you. Anybody else?
I might just add to that, I think back to the question of experiential learning. The standards and requirements and expectations we have of our schools and our students are so staggering sometimes that there are no minutes or brain cells left to do other things. And so, I remember back when I was in middle school, I thought it was the craziest thing that we had academics only half the day, and the other half you were in wood shop, or, I grew up really far from here, you can tell. But when I look back, those times were when I got to know people who were really different from me, and when I had time to think about, what did I hear in the news this morning? And it's a hard thing to do, and not one that parents in APS are necessarily asking for. But if we could let our foot off the brake a little, and say, hey, in middle school, you're going to go do service, every other week or whatever. Just live a little and live together. And so, those are that would be changing some institutions. But I think those are the questions I would keep asking of how do you actually go and do real work as a 14-year-old, and instead of just trying to absorb a lecture.
Yeah, and I would say it is about systems, and adults that lead these systems being intentional about bringing young people along. And so we have a club, we started a club at Dorothy Ham Middle School. And the activities director there, who is lovely, their philosophy was, giving young people agency, which we're all about positive youth development. But most young people are not going to choose this as an after-school club like I did, right? And so the partnership must be with parents, school administrators, school districts, the county, all the adults in the systems working together to be intentional about making it beyond an academic experience. And for young people, because ultimately young people are going to not be young, right? They're going to be on this side of the equation. And so, and we know that civic participation is episodic, right? And so when you're young, you've got all the time, but you don't have the money. And then when you're older, you have depending on where you are, you have some time and some money and, more money as you age, ideally. And so we just have to be intentional and so that we can create the kind of leader that we want leading us as we move through and age through our as we age. And so that, for me, is my hope. And we're helping to be a bridge builder across systems and bringing young people along.
Okay, great. So this is actually a question that I think builds off what Ms. Shorter just said in terms of engaging students both inside and outside the classroom. Chethan, what do you think is most effective in engaging students in that civic learning and getting them to participate? What approaches have you seen work, whether it's in your high school or in your peers?
I think that sort of recognizing that engagement doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be working for a congressman or going to the Capitol and lobbying for something. I think that something that I found really effective is doing something really local. Something that I do at Washington Liberty High School is I organize volunteer shifts at the Arlington Food Assistance Center, where we bag food and we distribute food to people in need in the community. And I think that that's such sort of a fun thing to do, really, just to go out and give food. But it's also a really powerful way of engaging with your community. It's civic engagement in a way that a lot of people don't think of. Like when you think of civic engagement, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. But volunteering and doing things like that at the local community in Arlington, it doesn't have to be anything related to politics, like in a political sense. But if you're just doing that, I think it's super effective, and I know so many high schoolers enjoy it. It's a very rewarding process, and I would encourage so many high schoolers to go out and volunteer locally and to help people in their own community, because that's such a great way to engage civically.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I definitely agree with what you were mentioning. So final question actually for Mr. Stockton. What responsibility do you think schools have in helping students, you mentioned, develop not only academically but also as participants in the community and democracy?
Well, just the experience that I talked about before, creating these partnerships like with the county and also these organizations, I think is one way that we can actually help them get more involved.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, here I come. Kathleen, you want to go first?
Hi, everybody. This was such a great conversation, and I'm so happy there were students really kind of leading the conversation. I've been volunteering in Arlington a long time, but the best three experiences I've had were one with the police practices group, when we pulled a group of students together to talk to us about the ways policing needed to change in Arlington. We had a large group, and it was a fabulous conversation. The second was when I was leading a Career Center working group, and we made sure we had students who were actually on the working group to give us their perspective. And the third was when I actually had, I was chairing another commission, and we had a student who was actually on our commission as a commissioner. JFAC, exactly, it was the JFAC. And again, the students actually brought a perspective that the adults needed to hear. And I will tell you, having a student on any sort of panel or in any sort of process makes the adults behave better, because you students actually are respectful of one another, and that is not always the case with adults sometimes. But here's my question, or my comment and my question. There's a certain element of privilege that comes with being able to volunteer. And as we've mentioned, there are so many kids in our school system who have to really go out and actually work to help their families pay rent and food, or they have to go home and watch their brothers and sisters. So I guess the question is, what can we do as a community to bring those students in who are not necessarily children of privileged families, who can then maybe make some money at the same time that they are either working for local organizations or working for the government. We do have internships that are not very well advertised, but students can actually earn pretty good money during the summers by working for with our county government.
I'll say from the county side, it's a whole series of things. You know, one is trying to make sure that the human needs of each of those families is being met so that there is some space and safety to engage with a neighbor. But I think the most successful things we've seen are either in partnership with the schools or with the recreation centers and libraries where there are safe spaces that can allow for interaction even while you're taking care of your little sibling. On the engagement side and the commission side, I think we are seeing very clearly, both for adults and for kids, that if we really want to do equitable engagement that reaches into and benefits from the voices of our whole community, we do need ambassadors, and those ambassadors are paid and trained and have a pathway so that they can be of a community that doesn't have that privilege and be the connection and the bridge. So it takes a lot of time, it takes money, and it takes leadership across the institutions to do it. And we're always open to other ideas too, because we haven't cracked it.
And I would just echo that. It takes money. And so about 85% of our programs are no cost. They're free. And so, and we do that with the intention of making it accessible for all kids. And so we didn't want to target a particular population of kids because then, you know, that equity as well. And so we wanted to make it available. And so, and then the programming that we do have that is at cost, it's lower, below the market rate for some of our summer camp programming. And we are able to exist off of, you know, donations. But the key is, from some of the data, is exactly what you said, was that economics does create a barrier for entry. And so we want to make sure that we are being able to make civic engagement a low barrier entry, like economics not be a barrier. So.
Tony, I'm going to move to Tony's answer.
Okay, fantastic.
You can answer Tony's question.
Okay, that's fine. Make it easy, Tony.
Super. I got a softball here. I'm Tony Weaver. I'm vice chair of Advance Arlington. And my question is on soft skills of young people in the workforce. And I think you all are a unique panel in that we've got some people who employ young people and others who are looking for jobs. And I will mention that I've seen this issue pretty consistently. For example, a friend who works for a U.S. senator had a colleague who informed the senator that she couldn't staff her one day because that wasn't her day to do it. And that's something that, you know, my generation, you know, the boss tells you to be there, you kind of be there. And I'd love to hear your perspectives and different scenarios or situations that you might have encountered relating to challenges of soft skills or lack of soft skills in the next generation.
I would say, as far as, you know, soft skills, it's not a course that we teach. But I would say at the same time, you know, with the new Grace Harper Center, the Career Center, they're more soft skill type of courses, more, I would say, career type of classes that we have there where we actually talk about some of the soft skills that we do. But I do think, Tony, that when it comes to soft skills, that's something we can improve upon. But I think as far as soft skills, you know, it's working with our teachers or working with the people that I work with. I think modeling the proper behaviors of soft skills. I mean, 85% of what everybody here has learned from leadership, they actually watch someone else do it. And so I think that, you know, we have to do a better job of being cognizant when we're around young people and showing those skills. And actually at the same time, you know, one thing that I do when I'm with some of our high school students and middle school students, and they're sitting beside me in a meeting, I take the time to kind of whisper to them and kind of help them understand certain things. So I don't have a magic wand for that, but this is something we could take up in our school district as far as a soft skills course or curriculum to kind of help these kids out. But again, I'm go back to experience. And put them out there. And then I'm going to take advantage and go back to the last question. You know, I am pretty sure, I was thinking over here, you know, like I said, with us three up here right now, I am pretty sure this is not the first time someone had the idea. I know our plates are full, But this is something we probably could take on as far as grading those experiences for kids. We just hired a new grant manager. She's approved all the grants for the Department of Education. She's been RIFed, so we've taken advantage of that. So I got someone who can actually look for funds, and we can kind of come up with some ideas, and I think we should do that. And I think the word I heard this evening was intentionality. And I think if we just got to put these microphones home and put these microphones down and walk, say, hey, good luck in college, we haven't done our job. So we have to model the proper behavior, but at the same time look for other opportunities through grants. And I think us three are giving us a job, you all, to do something for these kids.
Hi, my name is Greg Dumas, Arlington resident. A lot of our conversation tonight is focused on the role of the public education system. What happens once children graduate and leave? Looking around, at least at the event tonight and other events that I go to throughout the county, there are not a lot of people in my age range. It's excellent that we emphasize youth development and engaging early, but what institutional measures can be taken to not just take okay, you've left the nest, fly free, hopefully you come back someday and participate again once you're back from college or whatever path in life you take. What supports are there for your 20s, early 30s, so that there does not continue to be sort of a generational gap between the very young that are engaged and the very old that are engaged.
It's interesting. I appreciate the question because I was just talking to someone the other day and they were wondering why did YDI go all the way up to 24? And my position was, my response was, because there are 4.2 million youth ages 16 through 24 who are not even in school or in college or work, not in secondary education, post-secondary education, or working. And so there have to be pathways to reach them as well before they leave school at age 14 or 15, right? And so we are intentional at YDI in working with some of the other organizations like the Forum for Youth Investment, which is where I came from previously, in finding these youth, these adolescents who are, I think the term is disconnected, a more positive way of calling them is opportunity youth. And so making sure that they are reached and given, and so I think the way that we're doing it is through like a paid fellowship. So your question about economics, we have a paid fellowship which we're raising money for to provide for that demographic so that, and then give them the kind of training and soft skills so that they can enter into public service careers. So that's one way that we're looking at it, but you're absolutely right to question, like, what happens after they graduate?
I want to add to this. I think it's kind of the same thing for our students. We have to talk about things that are relevant to people who, after they've graduated high school. People in their 20s. I mentioned earlier about George Floyd. I think there were more people in their 20s and 30s that were actually civically involved in the protests that they did there. So I think is that, when we talk about issues, I don't think young people, even people in their 20s, care about left wing, right wing. They care about things that matter to them, that affects them. And I think, one other way we could do it is, we talked about earlier, who's on, we say Facebook, who's on Instagram. By the way, if you're on Facebook, you automatically have an Instagram account. So you got both. But I would say, using basically, the things that we're talking about, how we can expose young people to things, using those platforms to talk about issues that affect them. Talking about the climate change that you don't hear much about, talking about all those things, and also creating a good environment. I actually reflected while sitting here. I have several friends. One was a U.S. attorney, several lawyers, politicians, and when they were in their 20s, I was trying to have fun, but they were part of the Young Democrats of Memphis. And basically, it was a group that they were really involved, and it seemed cool to be part of at the same time as well. So I think, whatever organizations that we have here, we got to talk about the issues that affect them. At the same time, make it kind of cool, and also use some of the new media vehicles like a TikTok and Instagram, and actually to reach them at the same time as well. So.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists for their time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Advancing Arlington, to the board, Ms. Patel for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. And yeah, thank you so much.
So, Kathleen, I want to just take a moment of privilege here to say something in response to your comment about immigrant families and beyond the economic, because I think what you're talking about is more of the cultural aspect of it, right? The cultural aspect of needing to care for the family. And oftentimes that cultural aspect does fall on the older, daughter, right? Or older child to take care. And I encourage you guys, I'm going to make a little plug here for their colleagues. Larry, who is highlighted in APS as in one of the most recent posts, she did a podcast called Before I Was Ready. And it is on the Youth Advisory Board's In Our Voice podcast. And it is quite an interesting listen, saying all the things that you said. So I'm glad that you amplified this issue for the community around making sure that opportunities exist for young people who may not have the same schedule as their counterparts. So beyond the economic access, that barrier, there is another barrier that we need to be aware of, and that is one in which we really have to utilize our community assets that allow for programming beyond 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 9 to 7, and open those opportunities up either remotely or 7 to 8 or 9 or whatever it is, but making sure that those young people have the same level of access and opportunity as their counterparts. So thank you for elevating that issue, and I wanted to make sure that we said something about that for us to share with others. The other thing I wanted to say tonight, thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate each and every one of you and your thoughtful responses. But I really, sorry friends, if you're over the age of 18, I really appreciate the ones that are under 18 for being here tonight. And I especially want to say thank you for being honest and open about your experiences. It is quite daunting to be here in space with people who are, in some situations, not too much older than you, but in many situations, quite older than you. And so to be able to have the composure to be here and provide your thoughts and your experiences is something that we should be providing more opportunities for you to have authentic engagement with the larger community. So thank you very much. Thank you for moderating. You did a magnificent job. Thank you guys for being panelists. The other thing I want to say is democracy is not static. And so we have to make sure that we stop talking. If we are over certain age groups, if we are in spaces where we are trying to find out from those that we want to ensure that we are engaging, then we have to stop talking. Right? And we have to do more listening. And so that means that it may not be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and all those other platforms that we see. Maybe we ask them, what can we do and where can we meet you? Right? Maybe we are not the ones guiding anymore. So I say that to you guys to think about our next conversation, next program year, because this conversation needs to continue around how we ensure that all parts of our democracy are represented and engaged, for us to have a healthier Arlington for future generations beyond them. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you. Shout out to Daniel, because sometimes I forget to shout him out. Sorry, Daniel, I think the last 3 times. I'm so sorry. You have been amazing in making sure that all of our programs are available to people who may not be able to have to come here in the evenings, and so they are watching from places like Facebook and on YouTube and on our website. So thank you very much for being so consistently present for us. Jill, you make all things happen, so thank you very much. Our board, our sponsors, our program partners, all of our panelists, importantly, each one of you. Why would we have a conversation if there was no one here to have a conversation with? So without you, there could be no Advance Arlington. So every day we thank you for continuing to show up, continuing joining the conversation. Our conversation continues in June. And we hope that you come to June. We will not have a panel because June is our soiree. And we are so excited to have Elizabeth Tebow be present. There are flyers on the thing for you to attend. If you've not bought your tickets, please do so now. It is the hottest event in June, okay? Nobody is touching that event, all right? So come see us in June. Let's celebrate all the conversations we've had together this year and all the conversations that will continue with Advance Arlington. Thank you very much. You had all the places in the world that you could be, but you chose to be here with us this Wednesday night, and we thank you for it. Have a great evening.